She was selling you out to Tommy Castellano for 18 months, Francis. The newspaper clipping slipped under Frank's dressing room door at the Sands had just 4 words that made his blood run cold. Showgirl found dead Meade. But Dolores Martinez had been sitting in his private booth just 24 hours earlier, feeding him casino intelligence that had kept him ahead of his Vegas competition for over a year. The phone rang before Frank could process what he was reading. "She was playing you, Francis." The voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Double-dipping for 18 months. Thought you should know before the cops start asking questions." Click. Frank Sinatra had built his Vegas empire on information, knowing which casinos were struggling, which families were making moves, which politicians could be bought. In a town where fortunes changed hands faster than cards at a blackjack table, intelligence was the difference between staying on top and ending up buried in the desert. And for 18 months his best source had been selling him out to his biggest rivals. Dolores Martinez wasn't supposed to be anything special. Just another gorgeous brunette dancing at the Desert Rose Revue, trying to make it in a town that chewed up pretty girls and spit them out when they got too old or too smart for their own good. Frank had dozens of contacts across the Strip, dealers, waitresses, pit bosses who owed him favors or needed his protection. But Dolores had something different: access and ambition. She'd first caught Frank's attention in late 1957, not because of her looks. Vegas was crawling with beautiful women, but because of what she'd overheard. Tommy Castellano, who represented Chicago interests at the Tropicana, had been discussing a hostile takeover of the Riviera during what he thought was a private conversation with his accountant. Dolores had been serving drinks nearby, apparently focused on her job, but she'd caught every word. When she'd approached Frank's table later that evening, she hadn't asked for an autograph or tried to flirt her way into his inner circle. "Mr. Sinatra," she'd said quietly, "I think there's something you should know about the Riviera deal." That conversation had led to Frank outmaneuvering Chicago on the Riviera acquisition, a move that had netted him over $2 million and established his reputation as someone who always seemed to be one step ahead of the competition. It had also marked the beginning of the most profitable and, as he was now learning, most dangerous business relationship of his Vegas career. The arrangement had been simple. Dolores would use her position at the Flamingo to gather intelligence on competing casinos, their financial situations, their political connections, and their business plans. Frank would pay her well for reliable information and provide protection from the kind of men who didn't appreciate beautiful women who asked too many questions. It seemed like a perfect setup. Frank got the inside information he needed to stay ahead of his rivals, and Dolores got enough money to support her dreams of eventually breaking into legitimate entertainment. For over a year, the intelligence Dolores provided had been gold. She'd given Frank advance warning about federal investigations into money laundering at the Desert Inn, details about the Stardust's financial troubles that had allowed him to position himself as a potential buyer, and most importantly, insights into the shifting alliances between the East Coast families who controlled much of Vegas's underground economy. Frank had used her information to make strategic investments, avoid potential legal troubles, and build relationships with the right people at the right times. But now, sitting in his dressing room with that newspaper clipping in his hands, Frank was starting to understand that he'd been played by a master. The phone call had been brief, but the message was clear. Dolores hadn't just been working for him. She'd been feeding information to multiple buyers, playing all sides against each other while collecting paychecks from everyone involved. Frank's first instinct was to call Mickey Torino, a small-time dealer at the Desert Inn who made extra money selling information to anyone willing to pay for it. Mickey had his ear to the ground across the Strip, and if there was gossip about Dolores's real business, he'd know about it. "Mickey, it's Frank. I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "Sure thing, Mr. Sinatra. What can I do for you?" "Dolores Martinez. The girl from the Flamingo who turned up dead in Lake Mead. What's the word on the street about what really happened?" There was a long pause before Mickey answered. "You sure you want to know, Mr. Saz? Because once I tell you, you can't unknow it. Just give it to me straight, Mickey." Word is she was working multiple angles. Had been for months, maybe longer. Whatever she was telling you about the competition, she was also feeding to Tommy Castellano's crew at the Tropicana, and probably a couple other outfits too. Girl was ambitious. I'll give her that. Frank felt his chest tighten. How long? From what I'm hearing, pretty much from the beginning. She'd take information you gave her about your operations and sell it to your rivals. Then she'd take what she learned from them and sell it back to you. Classic double-dip operation, except she got greedy and started trying to play too many angles at once. Who else knew? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Could have been Tommy's people who figured it out and decided to clean house. Could have been somebody from your crew who found out about the double dealing. Hell, could have been the girl's ex-boyfriend or some John who felt like he got burned. In Vegas, there's always more people who want somebody dead than there are people willing to do something about it. Frank hung up the phone and sat back in his leather chair, trying to process the full scope of what he'd just learned. For 18 months, every piece of information he'd shared with Dolores had potentially been compromised. Every strategic decision he'd made based on her intelligence could have been anticipated by his rivals. Every business deal, every alliance, every move he'd made in the Vegas power structure had been watched and countered by people who knew exactly what he was planning. The implications were staggering. Frank's reputation in Vegas was built on his ability to outthink and outmaneuver his competition. If word got out that he'd been played by a showgirl for over a year, it wouldn't just cost him money, it would destroy his credibility and make him a target for every ambitious crew looking to move up in the Vegas hierarchy. But what really got under Frank's skin wasn't the money or even the hit to his rep. It was getting played like a rube. He'd trusted Dolores with information that could have gotten him whacked if it fell into the wrong hands. He'd kept the wolves away from her when other guys might have seen her as a liability. He'd even started thinking of her as more than just another employee, not romantically, but as somebody he could count on in a business where loyalty was rarer than an honest poker game. Frank spent the next 3 days quietly digging into Dolores's death and her business connections. Using contacts he'd built up over 15 years in Las Vegas, he started asking careful questions about her final weeks, her money situation, and who she'd been seeing. What he found out painted a picture of a young woman who'd been living way beyond what even her multiple paychecks should have covered. The real eye-opener came from somebody Frank never saw coming, Angela Torino, Eddie's sister, who slung drinks at the Sands and had been pals with Dolores. Angela sidled up to Frank at his regular booth in the copper room, sliding into the seat across from him with that jumpy energy people get when they know they're rolling the dice on something dangerous. "Mr. Sinatra, I gotta tell you something about Dolores. Something that might explain what really happened to her." Frank put down his drink and gave Angela his full attention. "I'm all ears, sweetheart. Dolores wasn't just selling information to you and Tommy Castellano. She was working for at least 4 different operations that I know of, maybe more. She had this whole system worked out. She'd take what she learned from one crew and sell it to their competition, then use what she picked up from those meetings to go back to the original guys with even better stuff." "How do you know all this?" "Because she tried to get me in on it. Said there was more dough to be made in a week selling secrets than there was in a year slinging drinks. She showed me bank statements. Mr. Sinatra, the girl was pulling in more cash than some of the casino managers." Frank felt that cold understanding settle in his gut. "What else?" "She was getting sloppy toward the end. Started bragging about how she had all these powerful guys eating out of her hand, how she could make or break careers with one phone call. Dolores always was too smart for her own good, but she started thinking she was smarter than everybody else in Vegas. That's a real good way to get yourself killed in this town." "Did she say anything about being in hot water? About anyone leaning on her?" Angela shook her head. "That's the thing, she wasn't scared. She should have been, but she wasn't. Dolores thought she had everybody figured out, thought she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. But she didn't realize that some of the people she was dealing with had been playing this game a lot longer than she had." Frank thanked Angela for the information and watched her disappear back into the crowd of Copa Room patrons. Then he sat alone in his booth, nursing his whiskey and trying to piece together the full scope of Dolores's operation. The picture that emerged was both impressive and terrifying. Dolores had essentially created her own private intelligence agency, collecting information from multiple sources and selling it to the highest bidders. She'd been playing Frank against Tommy Castellano, Chicago against New York, old Vegas families against new money from Los Angeles. For a young woman with no formal training in espionage or organized crime, it was a remarkably sophisticated operation. But it was also completely unsustainable. Vegas information was power, but it was also dangerous. The kind of secrets Dolores had been trafficking could get people killed, could bring down entire operations, could shift the balance of power between families who had been at war for decades. Someone selling that kind of intelligence couldn't stay neutral forever. Eventually they'd have to choose sides, or their clients would choose for them. Frank's investigation into Dolores's death revealed that in her final weeks she'd made a crucial mistake. She'd started trying to blackmail her clients. According to several sources, Dolores had begun demanding larger payments for her information, threatening to expose the operations of anyone who wouldn't meet her price. She'd apparently believed that her value as an intelligence asset made her untouchable, that the various factions would protect her because they needed what she was selling. She'd been wrong. The call that had informed Frank of Dolores's betrayal came again 3 days later. This time the voice was more conversational, almost friendly. "Francis, I hope you're not taking this Dolores thing too personally. Business is business after all." "Who is this?" Frank kept his voice steady, professional. "Let's just say I'm someone who's been watching your Vegas operations with interest." Dolores was a useful asset for a while, but she got greedy. Started thinking she could dictate terms to people who don't like being dictated to. "So you had her killed?" "I didn't have to do anything, Francis. Dolores killed herself the moment she started thinking she was bigger than the game she was playing. All I did was make sure the right information got to the right people at the right time." Frank understood. Someone had orchestrated Dolores's downfall by revealing her double-dealing to all of her clients simultaneously. Once everyone knew she'd been playing them against each other, her death had become inevitable. The only question was who would get to her first. "What do you want?" Frank asked. "Nothing, really. Just wanted you to know that your little intelligence network has been compromised from the beginning. Thought you might want to consider new arrangements. And if I don't, then you'll keep operating with information that's been filtered through people who don't have your best interests at heart. Your choice, Francis. But I'd think carefully about who you trust going forward." The line went dead, leaving Frank staring at the receiver and understanding that he'd just been offered a choice between paranoia and stupidity. In Vegas, paranoia was often the more rational option. Frank spent the next 6 months systematically dismantling the intelligence network he'd built around Dolores and her connections. It was expensive and time-consuming, but it was the only way to ensure that his operations weren't being monitored by competitors who had been using his own information against him. The process forced him to completely change how he did business in Vegas. Instead of relying on a few highly placed sources, he began cultivating multiple smaller contacts who only knew pieces of the larger picture. Instead of sharing strategic information with his intelligence assets, he began compartmentalizing his operations so that no single source could compromise his entire organization. Most importantly, Frank learned to assume that every conversation was being recorded, every relationship was being monitored, and every piece of information he shared would eventually find its way to his competitors. It was a paranoid way to operate, but in Vegas, paranoia was often indistinguishable from wisdom. Dolores Martinez was never mentioned in any of the official histories of Las Vegas. Her death was officially listed as an accidental drowning, and within a month most people had forgotten she'd ever existed. But for Frank Sinatra, her betrayal became a fundamental part of his education in the realities of power in a city where everyone was watching everyone else, and where loyalty was just another commodity to be bought and sold. The Showgirl's double cross had taught Frank that in Vegas the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones who opposed you openly. They were the ones who smiled and called you friend while selling your secrets to the highest bidder. It was a lesson that would serve him well in the years to come as Vegas continued to evolve and the stakes continued to get higher. In the end, Dolores Martinez had given Frank Sinatra the most valuable education of his Vegas career, understanding that in a city built on deception, the biggest deception of all was thinking you knew who you could trust. Frank survived by learning to trust no one completely, and to assume that every alliance was temporary, every friendship was conditional, and every secret shared was a potential weapon in someone else's hands. The double agent's betrayal had cost him money, credibility, and peace of mind, but it had also made him smarter, more careful, and ultimately more successful in a business where the price of naivety was often measured in blood. If this shocking story of betrayal and survival in the golden age of Vegas moved you, show your appreciation with a like, because in Vegas, trust was the most dangerous gamble of all. What do you think? Was Dolores a master manipulator or just a desperate woman who got in over her head? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from the dark side of Las Vegas, where loyalty was for sale and information could kill.